out of curiosity before I start, how many people have heard me talk before in learning technology? Or okay, thank you. So learning by doing, we all know that active learning is better than passive learning. We know that doing, having a memorable experience is better than learning by sitting down and being a passive learner and taking notes, etc., etc. I don't need to say to you, because you all know that. I don't want to preach to the choir, and we may even be doing it too much. Nevertheless, what I want to do today is to take it a step further, a big step further that you may feel uncomfortable in doing, but I'm going to challenge you to go to take it further. Before I talk about that, I just want to mention what learning is, because I think too often we forget, and we talk about one perspective when really there are 3 different perspectives. We all know that when we train, we want people to acquire content, skills, ability, but it's also about the ability to remember it and retrieve it later. If not, it goes in one ear and out the other. And we may be very pleased because people have done our learning module. At the end of the module, they do an exam, a test, a quiz. They get 80, 90%. Everybody is happy. But a day later, and I challenge you to do that, give them the same test a day later or a week later, and you'll see that they don't pass. Give it 2 months later, they'll have no idea what you're talking about, and they don't remember. Of course, if they don't acquire the information or skills to begin with, it doesn't even go in one ear. So it's not that it goes in one and the other. But today I want to focus about applying the ability to use the information and to have a behavioral impact. So in the few cases where people actually acquire the information and remember it, it doesn't change their behavior. And most of the training and learning we're doing here is not academic. It's not learning for the sake of learning. We want them to go back to their job, to what they're supposed to do, and do things better or do them differently. And that happens very, very rarely. And many of us don't want to know. So we don't even collect data how much is happening. The trainers pass an exam. They say they loved the training. But does it really make an impact? Do they go and change and do things differently? When I talk about applying, we want to talk about 2 different cognitive terms. One is transfer. Does the learning transfer from the learning environment to the working environment, from an e-learning module to working in the store, from a medical simulation to a patient? Whatever the training is, does it transfer? But it's not enough that it transfer, it needs to generalize, because you're not going to train about every situation, and you want it to apply to a whole range of relevant situations. So it doesn't need only to transfer, but they have to have a flexible mental representation so they can apply it to a whole range of domains. So you don't need to come and train them again and again, and you can't, in most domains, train them to every kind of customer, every patient, every technical fault in the computer, or whatever your training is all about. So you want it to transfer, and you want it to generalize it so they can apply it in a flexible way. The problem is, I think, bad news and good news. The bad news, these 3 elements of acquiring the memory and the application decision-making system are very different from a cognitive perspective. There are different brain structures, there are different systems in the brain. But the good news is that they're intertwined and interdependent. If they acquire the information in a certain way, they will remember it and they'll use it. And acquiring it in a way that they're going to remember it and use it doesn't cost more money, is more difficult, but a small change in how they represent and acquire the information initially is going to determine if they remember it and if they're using it. And when we're talking about learning by doing, it's good for all 3. Being active, doing, experiencing, we can increase the acquisition of information, the memory, and the application. So we're talking about learning by doing. not all learning by doing is created equal. What kind of doing are we talking about? Some are more effective, and some are less effective. And I'm in England, so I'm saying less effective, rather pure waste of time to do, and so on and so forth. This determines what kind of experience the learners get when they do, if they're going to remember it, and if they're going to use it. Is it going to transfer or not? Can they generalize? Does it modify behavior? In most cases, it doesn't modify behavior. We even don't collect data to see that. What kind of activities, what experience do you give them? And this depends on a whole variety of elements. I'll just mention a few. Is it a challenge? Is it an engaging activity? Are there surprises? Is there an emotional component to it? Before I elaborate, I really need to emphasize, and this is a whole talk by itself, so I'm not going to do more than mention it, that the learning must be embedded in the activity. Because we can do a lot of activities, and we can have great fun and entertainment, and we can even have games and lots of stuff, but they don't learn anything. You have to remember that the doing, the surprises, the emotional component, the challenging, the engaging, is not a goal by itself. It's a means. It's OK to have fun when you're learning, but if you're having so much fun that you've learned nothing, and when you talk, you're in entertainment. When you do an e-learning module, it's edutainment, then we're missing it. And many times, you have to do it correctly. Having a surprise by itself doesn't enhance learning. It can even detract. It's a matter of how you do it and to very cleverly embed the learning within it. So let's talk about some examples. OK, challenges, something engaging. So here's a demo that I like to use. You can try it today. If you've seen it before, don't participate. I will give 40 pounds. I used to do 20, but the economy is better now. So to motivate you, I need to raise the price. If you can say, and I want a volunteer, if you want the easiest 40 pounds you've ever made, to say the months of the year that you know, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, by alphabetical order. Does anybody want to try it? And if you can't do it, you don't have to pay me 40 pounds. Anyone want to try for 40 pounds? 50. I'm not going higher. This is as much as I'm going now. Does anybody want to try to do it? OK. 4:30, the end of the presentation. Then everybody's going. No, it's not a trick. Here, you don't trust me? Here, Alan, you hold the money. Here, give it to her.
I'm off.
and
Should I do it now?
If you want the money, you need to do it now.
August.
If you help her, you're going to pay the 50 pounds.
April, August. No.
She said. I'll be the judge. April, August. Very good. Are you helping her?
December.
Strike two, and we're going to pay her the 50 pounds.
December.
I'm serious.
I'm not good at this, am I?
You're very good. You're doing great.
December. January.
No. February. Everybody's smart. She's the only one who picked your hand up. So good for you.
Did you see the speed? He took that money back.
It's April, August, December, February, January, July, June, March, May, November, October, and September. Now, I'm not very smart. Don't clap. Don't. I don't deserve it. I memorized it by alphabetical order. It takes you 2 minutes. This is a demo, which I'm not going to explain why I do, about the memory system, that how you train is how you're going to use it, and it's connected to application in terms of mental representation. But now I'm bringing it in the terms of challenging and engaging. This is a demo that people find challenging, and I don't have to break you into groups and give you some tasks. This is a demo that people like. Everyone is trying to do it, and you remember it. And not only you remember it, but you understand if I brought it within the context. Now I'm just giving you examples of that it's connected to the learning material, but embedding it correctly. So you remember the demo and you're having fun, but it has to do with how we acquire information, how we represent it, how we retrieve it, flexibility. And I haven't really built it. I'm just giving you the demo to give an example of doing it doesn't mean everybody has to see it and everyone has to do it. It can be one person if it's engaging, and it's so engaging that people try to help. And by the way, what's your name who participated? Alex. Nobody can do it. I've done it thousands of times because, and there's a reason, a cognitive reason in terms of working memory, short-term memory, how many items you can scan at one time. And I'm not going to lecture about that because that's not the topic today. But I can and bring this demo to doing it in a way that people later remember it much more. So maybe your people are a different audience, they're kids, so they can do something. This is totally not educational game, but you can embed it. You can have twisters, and they can learn continents and the ocean, where the Pacific, where the Atlantic, by playing twisters. It's fun, it's engaging, it's challenging, so it doesn't have to be very sophisticated. For every level, you can do learning by having people actually participate. If you embed it, and they actually learn the different continents and the oceans and the spatial relations between them. So this is about challenges and engaging. Surprises are also good, are a very important element by learning and doing, but again, you have to implement it. Somebody heard the talk of mine and then did a surprise, which had nothing to do with the learning, and it didn't enhance the learning, it even detracted. It has to be connected. So here's an example. I ask you to count how many times the letter F appear in this paragraph. Three. Pick up your hand if you see three. Pick up your hand, three. Three or four. Five. OK, don't put your hands up because I'll tell you there are six. So first of all, let me show you there are six. Surprise. 1, 2, and 3. Everybody saw, but it's of, and of. There are 3 ofs here. You don't know what an F looks like? Are you stupid? Are you blind? No, you're not. And again, I'm not going to explain. This is just examples of doing, but when I lecture about that the human mind is not a camera, how people perceive information, it's not what you show them, it's how the brain filters out information. And the brain automatically, without awareness, it's not a problem with the eyes. This information gets to the brain, disregards because of cognitive load, selective attention. And again, I have a 2-hour lecture on it, which I'm not going to give you now. But this is an example of some kind of surprise. So everyone is surprised. Most of you were surprised. How couldn't I see it? What's going on here? But you're doing something. And again, we don't have to break for 2 hours for a project. And there's another example that I'm not showing because you're very familiar, the gorilla. You're familiar with that? It's also a surprise. What, I didn't see the gorilla. Again, an element of people doing something, counting balls and don't see a gorilla, and you get a surprise. And that is a very important element when they're doing. It's not doing for the sake of doing, it's putting the engagement, doing the challenges, the surprises. Now we're going to get to emotional. So I need to train my kids. How many of you have kids? Dogs or kids? OK. I have to train my kids not to open the door to strangers. You don't know who it is, do not open the door. I can't explain too much, because if I say don't open the door, because somebody may want to come in the house and burglar the house and steal your computer, or even better, somebody wants to rape you, is not something I want to tell my 10-year-old kid and explain. So I just need to train them not to open the door. And you can tell them and tell them and tell them that training is not effective unless you do an emotional training. So this is what I do to my kids. You don't have to do it to your kids. Don't report me to child abuse when I tell you what I do. I give them a memorable experience to impact their behavior. So what I do after I tell them for years, don't open the door, don't open the door. When I go shopping and leave them, for a second, back in 20 minutes, after 5 minutes, I come to the door, I put my finger on the spy hole, and I knock on the door. I say, who is it? I don't answer. Knock on the door. They don't open the door. After 30 seconds, they can't help it. It's human nature. I knock. They open the door. And when they open the door, one, I give them a shock. I go, wah! And they say, why did you open the door? I told you not to open the door. They're quite upset, tearful, but I'll tell you, they will never, ever do that again. One emotional experience, and I did it to my kids. When I lived on a farm a long time ago, on the farm, they had dogs dying all the time because they run around, and there's lots of tractors going, until someone said, we're taking the dogs when they're young, when they're not young puppies, but a few months old, and you take a spare wheel of a car, and you take the wheel of the car, and you run the wheel near them, touching them, not damaging them, but giving them a bit of a scare. And we did that, and from then, the dogs would stay away from the tractors. There was no more dogs. One shocking, emotional event in the dog, all their life would stay away from wheels of the cars and the tractors. So this is emotional. You give them an emotional experience in doing the thing. One last example before I move on. I was in a conference in Las Vegas, boring, gave my talk, went to gamble, lost all my money, had nothing to do, so I went to ride a gondola in the Venetian hotel. And as we're going, the gondolier, every few minutes, there's a bridge. He bends down and misses the bridge. And I was really impressed. I said, that's very impressive. How do they train you to do it? They say, they train all of us. It doesn't help. But then we hit our head once, and we fall in the water, and we never do it again. They need that experience to do that. And I want to focus on this kind of emotional experience when I'm talking about impacting behavior. We do have the challenges, engaging, the surprises that I've talked about. So we're talking about a continuum from a more subtle to a more radical emotional experience. And I'll just give you a few examples of this continuum. So on a more subtle edge, tell them a personal, tell them an emotional story. That engages them. So I work a lot with police. So I have a personal story to tell them when I witness a police officer being attacked. I have an emotional story to tell them about when I was attacked by a gang. I work in the medical domain. I tell them what happened to my mom in hospital. I have a very colorful life. I have stories about every domain. If you don't have a colorful life, I don't care if you make up the story. If you tell, come to me, I'll give you a nice story. But this is a very subtle when giving them an emotional, and I'll get to explain why it's so effective also, an emotional kind of connection, so it goes into memory of emotions, into episodic memory. Then you can give them photos. What is that? We train people who work in security, extra in the airport, and we train them, and they have to look every day, no bomb, no bomb, no bomb, no bomb, no bomb. Bloody boring, no bomb, no bomb. That's all they do. How many bombs do they find? They find 0 bombs, right? Every day, 6 million people travel, there isn't a single bomb. So they'll do it for 20 years. So to get them engaged, we can show them photos, right? We show them photos. If you don't pay attention, a bomb can go on the plane, and then show them a photo of some dead child. You, 1 minute you're texting, 10 seconds you're texting and not looking at the screen, you can be responsible for that. Give them an emotional experience. Do you want people to stop drinking and driving? Do you want to talk to the rational brain and say, 82.5% of the car accidents are connected to driving? Or you want to show them some pictures of car accidents to get a very salient mental representation. Do you want to tell your young kids, have safe sex? The statistics is this and that. You can get pregnant. What you think when they're half drunk and in the passion of the moment they think? No, but show some young man some diseases and some, I'm recorded, so I'll watch my language, but a penis almost falling down because it had a disease and blisters. Believe me, they'll remember to put a condom on next time, because this is a very emotional, strong experience of showing them. I'm still in the subtle. I'll get to the radical in a minute. Okay, moving down to experience errors. Errors are extremely powerful tool. We know when I can talk about it for hours, and I'll spare you right now, but if you look at your personal experiences, we remember a bad thing that happened to us 20 years later. They're very powerful for learning. The power of error is huge. So we need to think how we create it, and we can create it by sabotage. We let people, we'll talk if it's ethical in a minute, do something, and we set them up to fail during training, because then they're going to remember. It doesn't help to show them how to do it, because it will not impact their behavior. You show them how to do it, and you set them up to fail and give them a bit of an error they will remember. I'll give you 2 examples. In the health domain, septic shock. People come to the hospital, they're misdiagnosed in septic shock. You come, you have low blood pressure. They say, oh, you have low blood pressure. They give you medication to raise your blood pressure. They come after a few hours, the blood pressure is still low. It's even lower. Let's increase the dosage. And they go on, and by the time they realize it's septic shock and they apply the protocol, 50% of the people die from septic shock. If they did the protocol, they would live a normal life. 350,000 people die a year from septic shock in the United States. 1,000 people will die today in the United States. I don't know the statistics about English. And they train them, and they train them. And it's real nice that they train them. No impact on behavior, because in the hospital, they're busy. They have patients screaming. They have, it's a chaotic time pressure, and a lot of issues are going on. So that doesn't help. What helps is when we train them, we bring them into a simulation, and we sabotage. I set them up to kill a simulated patient. Don't worry. I don't tell them they're training for septic shock. We train them to deal with low blood pressure. I'm intentionally deceiving them. And they come in, and they treat for low blood pressure, and they give more, and what's wrong? Increase the dosage, and they do the simulation, and the patient dies. And then when they get the error that it was septic shock, you were fixating. It's a fixating, escalation of commitment, tunnel vision, a few phenomena that we deal with cognitive science and decision making. Then they learn. Then they remember. The same with saving a file. I tell my students, I tell my kids, save. When you work on a paper, save a file all the time, because if there's no electricity or the computer breaks, you will lose it. They don't until they lose a file. Even a small file, you remember. That's what happens. Washing your hands. We train nurses and doctors, wash your hands. But we can set them up in a round. That's what I suggested when I work in the Canadian, where the senior professor goes, and they don't wash their hands. And then they go to a patient, and they wait if the students and the nurses say anything. Are you noticing that I haven't washed my hands? Why aren't you saying something? A whole range of activities of doing that you sabotage them intentionally, giving them wrong label on the medication, giving an IV that's broken, all this stuff, because that is what they're going to remember and going to impact. So when they're dealing with a real patient, it's going to transfer, and they're busy. The emotional experience involved in experiencing an error is so powerful that it's very effective. Now, let's move to the radical. Shock them, give them a trauma. An example, nurses go to patients all the time and don't check the patient. They do what they need to do, and they're not asking. So one solution is NHS solution. All the nurses need to go to every patient every hour and say, Mr. Clive, how are you? I asked him. I have to fill a paperwork. Now they're filling a lot of paper. Every time they ask a patient how you are, they have to go and write it down. They have to ask every patient. What a waste of time. What paperwork. But they need to pay attention. So here's what we do. Train nurses or medical assistants to take blood pressure with a machine. And if it doesn't work, you have to change a battery. You have to do this. And we say you need to always check the patient, even if they're sleeping, whatever. Of course, they don't do it. But what we do, don't get angry at me, is when a patient dies on the ward, we pretend they're sleeping, and we send them to take the blood pressure. And they go and they take the blood pressure, and it comes at 0. And they change the batteries. It still is not working. And they can't figure out because they're not checking the patient. And they come back and say, I don't know what's wrong. I'm getting 0. He said, "Have you checked the patient?" And they go back, and the patient is dead. Now, they didn't kill him. It's a patient that died anyhow. They will remember. They don't need to fill every day 15 forms, and it doesn't help. They remember. We have given them an emotional, shocking, traumatizing experience that they're going to remember and is going to impact their behavior. If you want to apply, I said I'm going to take a big step, so here's what I'm talking. I don't advise you to do it, and if you do, I take no responsibility. Don't sue me for that. The question that I ask is, how far do you want to go? What is justified? What is ethical in all this question? And the applications, I don't have time now, about health and safety, fire, diversity training, compliance. You want to make an impact? Yeah, you have diversity training. We all do. They come in, and we train them, and they leave. They're not sexist anymore. They're not racist. They're not homophobic. They're not anti-Semitic. Of course not. It's a waste of time, the way diversity. Health and safety. We train them. They go, yeah. And then they go. It doesn't impact behavior. The applications are huge. The question is, how far, how radical do you want to go? What are the ethical issues? What are the considerations when we talk about this kind of experiential emotional training? Is a nice label for it. The first question is, who are you training? Do they need it? I won't ask again if you have kids or dogs, okay? So who are you dealing with? Do you need it? If you don't need it, don't use it. If you have great training and it impacts behavior, not they really liked it and everyone said your training is wonderful and they passed your quiz at the end of the acquisition, but really test, not a week later, 6 months later, have it impact behavior. They may not need it. Don't kill a fly with a cannon. 1. 2, can they take it? We don't want in a medical simulation to traumatize residents, which we're doing now in Chicago in an operation, that they get such a trauma that they quit the profession or they lose self-confidence when they go to a real patient. They're shaking because they killed so many patients in simulations, right? So can they take it? How do you calibrate who they are? A complicated question. How complex is the material? How difficult is it for you to train and to have impact behavior? Again, don't kill a cannon with a fly. You need to do it when you really need to have an impact and think who they are, what they need, what is not too much, and what needs to be done. How important? I don't want to put anyone down, but if you're training people in a supermarket or a mobile phone and they give the wrong price, that's not great. But if you don't diagnose septic, people are dying, thousands of people. This is serious stuff with training. Police officers go and shoot innocent people, right? They shot the Brazilian guy because that escalation of commitment. They decided he's a terrorist and shot him 7 times in the head. So depending how important the learning is and how frequent. Sometimes you train them for something that will happen years down the road, and they need to remember it. Sometimes you train them, and even if they forget, it's going to happen every day at the workplace. Pediatric cardiac arrest, heart attack for children, a very, very rare occasion, but pediatrics need to know what to do. It may happen twice in their career, but if they don't, the kid will die. So we need to train them that 10 years later, when a kid gets a heart attack, they'll know what to do. So again, you need to think what is appropriate. Depends who you are. You may want to be in your boxes, in your safety zone, in your comfort zone. I don't want to take you out. But if you want to innovate, you want to get out of your boxes, get out of your safety zone, comfort zone, then please do. And depending on your organization, I give lots of workshops. Some companies, I'll do competitions. Some like it, some don't. Some don't allow me to give money. I can only give chocolate. Sometimes they give alcohol. They don't like that. So there's a culture in your organization which may or may not encourage doing this kind of stuff that may be needed. So it's a continuum from telling them a story to really doing significant manipulation. Another problem, it's very hard to see mistakes we make. It's very easy to see it in others. A lot of literature on that. And we know that when we train people to give lectures, many times, I can show you a bad example, but we like to videotape them, and they watch their own video to have another view on themselves. It's very hard to see how you go wrong. It's relatively easy to see how other people go wrong. And there's a whole literature why that happens. So you can do it in stages. So we, for example, develop interactive videos. And if you go to my website, we've put one in surgery, once in health and safety in a laser laboratory, and one on teaching children to cross the road. The applications are very wide, where you look at a video, and it's interactive. So it's doing, when you see a mistake, you need to click on the mistake when it happens. So you watch it, and you have to click, and if you don't click, it stops after. What's going on? Don't you see this is wrong? And when you click, you may get a reward, you may get a question, but it's an interactive video where you start, first of all, recognizing the error that somebody else makes, and then we move to sabotage, where you do it when you experience error. And the whole methodology where we start with very big errors that are easy to see and kind of ridiculous, and then they get more and more subtle. And we use it not only for training, but also for testing what errors do they find, what they don't find, and they can get errors that they see in other people. And you can do a whole variety of things. For example, I want to teach to have backups. Uh-oh, what's going on here? I'm faking this. Yes, you guess that. Oh, I want the IT guy not to panic. It's working. It's not working. Hey, can you help me here? What's going on? It can look quite stupid, easy for me to do. And that's something that you can see. If I want to take it to the next stage, what can I do in the next stage? When you present, I'll make the computer break down or whatever, so you will learn to have a backup. And it's in many, many domains that you can play this game. For example, if I'm talking, someone is annoying me, is texting, when shall I interfere or not interfere? Shall I ignore it and continue, especially if they're sitting on a podium? Shall I be kind of more subtle, like sometimes I am, and I go and he's cooperating with me. He's faking. We're all faking. And go and touch your hand like this, appropriate to Alan, because I know Alan. It would be appropriate if I go and a woman is texting, you know, and put my hands on her, maybe not. Maybe I need to say, hey, what the bloody hell are you doing texting in my class? Get out! Traumatize him and traumatize everybody else not to text. Or take a baseball bat and, you know, the old-fashioned, not a baseball, a ruler, right? What is a British? When I studied in Hampstead in secondary school here, see, I'm quite old, they had rulers and they would, I felt it more than once. So we need to think of all those different issues. And today, I wanted to do, and I really considered what to do. I said, maybe I'm going to ask Alan to get a heart attack and choke in the middle of the talk, okay? Or smoke and a fire. So if you're teaching health and safety, if I'm teaching a group of paramedics, I teach police officers, perception of risk, decision to use force, crime scene, decision under stress. So we have a 2-day workshop. Wake them up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Have an accident. In a case of fire, you have to do this. What's going to happen? Let's set the place on fire and have a nice demo. Now, I don't know you well enough. It's a big group. Maybe someone, their parents or someone they know died from a heart attack last week. They're not going to enjoy Alan, and I'm not going to enjoy giving him CPR either, right? But you need to think about it very, very carefully, what kind of things you want to do. So this is all extremely important when we're talking about experiential, from emotional learning to experiential learning. So what I want you to do now, learning by doing, we like to say, I want each one of you for 2 minutes, first of all, individually, I want you to think in your domain of applying what I've said. I want one example, subtle, and one radical, traumatizing. And I want you to pick not something that you train and is easy, but something that you train and you know or have a gut feeling that you're wasting your time. People don't change their behavior. An obstacle, say, oh, I hate training because people go back and ignore me. Take that, because you want to use a challenge. I want you to spend a minute or two by yourself, think of easy or subtle and radical. Then I'd like you to share in the table your examples with one another, and then pick one or two examples that you want to share with everyone. It doesn't have to be the same problem, but it's elegant if you show a problem in the same problem, the subtle and the radical, but it can be two different problems. Any questions? So think of a problem in your domain, emotional experience, subtle, traumatizing, then share with one another, and then pick which one you want to share with a group. Yes, it's time to start sharing. I can use the microphone because I can move around because of this. So I'll use that instead of you walk around. If you can, testing, can you hear me? If you can finish sharing and decide which ones you like the most, if you like the subtle or radical or one of each, I'll give you two more minutes to finish sharing and decide which two examples you want to pick in each group to share. So 2 more minutes to finish and choose. I am sorry I need to stop you. We have very limited time, so I apologize for those who have not shared their creative ideas. And I feel we're not going to have time to really everyone share. We'll be here a whole day, and there's still a lot to talk about. So why don't we start with people who want to volunteer rather than going table by table, which we won't be able to do all the tables. So who wants to start us off? Okay.
I was a banker for 10 years, and
speak slowly so everyone can hear you.
sorry. I was a banker for 10 years, and I had one of my assistants was very not organized and would put.
Can you hear her in the back? Okay, thank you.
Would put like important documents out and not lock them. So the first time I just put a post-it on, it was an order note of like millions, and I put a post-it and I said, "What is this doing here?" And then and he's like, he stopped for a while, and then the second time I saw it, it was a $10 million note on his desk, although it was in between the papers, but I spotted it, so I hid it for 1 week, and he had to report this missing to the committee. And of course, not just him, but all the assistants would always keep the security documents in check.
I think that's an excellent example where people need to have security, not leave laptops or documents. The subtle one is to leave a post-it note, and the more severe one is to take it. I've experienced, I told you I had a very colorful life. I experienced it in the military where you had your machine gun and you had to make sure it's with you all the time and sleep with it and hug it. And the officers would come at night and try to take it away, and you woke up without it. You remember that experience. What did you do with a 10 million pound note? I just should have taken it. Never mind. Other examples, very good. And so you've done it, and with a person, I really want to talk to you, but I'll just ask you, we don't have time for the answer. Did the person who you hid it, did they hate you? Were they angry at you? Were they so happy that it was not actually lost? So we can have not simple questions here, but these are things you need to think about. Any other volunteers? Any ideas? Anybody who wants? Yes, please.
In the army, for obvious security reasons, people have to have their Facebook accounts and the like locked down so that not everybody's got access to that sort of personal information, and that's particularly the case on the run up to deployment when you go to Afghanistan. In most units, they do it everywhere. When you get in these briefs and you're told, you know, you've got to have it all locked down and no personal information on there, people don't listen. So usually you'll get the nominal role of who's going to be there in advance. You'll find somebody on there, and then you'll start taking screenshots and you'll get all the information on the presentation so that when it's delivered, that person's sat in the audience and they're cringing and going red. And you only have to do it to one person because everybody else will look around at him and think, yeah, I don't want that to be me. So that usually works.
Do you pick the person randomly or someone you don't like personally, or how? What's it?
There's a bit of that, but some people will have it locked down already, so you have to pick somebody who's let the guard down.
Excellent. I'm happy and a bit surprised to hear that people are already doing it, because I'm being radical and people are going to, so good, I hear it's happening. Please.
Okay, so my story is a bit more personal. So I have 2 Great Danes. Great Danes are notorious for going after anything large which moves, including small deer. So one of the things we do is we put citronella collars underneath their chins when they're quite young and take them out to a field. As soon as they see a muntjac or something like that, press the button. Puts a nasty smell underneath their nose, and they don't like it. So then you train them to immediately come back to you. After a period of time, as soon as they smell a muntjac or a deer, they automatically come back to me. I don't have to press the button. So they've had that experience of, oh, really don't like that. Doesn't smell very nice. I'm going to go back to the boss. But again, I've seen what they can do if they are not controlled. So there's something, just give them a bit of a shock, give them a bit of, come back to me now, and they stop chasing deer.
So when I asked if anybody had kids or dogs and they were laughing, you know we were talking business. I saw a few more hands. Yes, please.
My experience is in the HSE training in the oil and gas industry. I try and bring in like real world stories. And I've had I worked 15 years offshore in operations. And most people, as soon as you talk about HSE training, they just switch off, and it's commonly called safety bullshit. That's what people call it. I've been on several HSE leadership courses, and it's pretty much the same. You sit there and you listen to PowerPoint lectures for 3 or 4 days, and it really doesn't help people. I've started a new job recently as an instructor, a technical instructor in Aberdeen. And I decided I'm just not going to do the HSE training. And what we do is actually, when we're doing the maintenance tasks, is bring in a real world, something that's actually happened. And one of the ones that I'd like to bring in is when we're working on the winches and the A-frames, is lockout tagout. We were always hearing lockout tagout, but there was someone who was killed 2 years ago, crushed between an A-frame and a piece of equipment simply because they didn't follow lockout tagout. And there's some really good photographs, not of the body, but the aftermath. Then there was another job that I was on where an A-frame collapsed. And it was down to not doing maintenance properly. And there was just simply a pin that had come out, and that collapsed. And nearly 2 people were killed. So I think with the people who I'm working with, if I say, right, we're going to do HSE training now, they will automatically switch off. So just try and integrate it in a subtle way. I like the idea of these stories, these shocking stories.
But you're not showing them the pictures of the people dead, only the equipment. And there's some blood stains, or you clean that? This has a huge effect in court when evidence is presented. If they're in black and white or color picture, it affects the sentence of the guilty person. It's very strong effects, and they isn't right or wrong. The prosecution wants color pictures, and the defense wants black and white picture. This really affects perception, memory, and decision making. Any other ideas?
I was working in the builders merchants industry, working with young apprentices coming in as management trainees, and they knew that when they went to their first store where they had to work, they had to have all their health and safety stuff. They had to have their high-vis jacket and their hard hat. And a 16-year-old on his very first day at work did not have his high-vis jacket. He walked across, was messing about a bit, danced underneath the, danced in front of, as he was walking across the yard, a forklift truck carrying a series of bricks, a stack of bricks. Forklift truck driver stopped suddenly, the bricks fell off, and he was very, very badly injured. And ever since then in that company, the CCTV of the yard and that accident happening is shown to every single management trainee and now any other manager joining the business, because it is very shocking. The good news is he did survive. He was off work for just over 2 years, came back in, and he's now a very successful manager.
Excellent. And that reminds me, in the United States, even with all the shootings, #1 cause for police officer dying is when they stop on the freeway, a motorway, people in the car and another car hits a police officer. So they have a few videos of that because all the cars have a video and use it in training of police to see that. You have a lot of great creative ideas, and we can talk about it for a long time, and I'd like to, but there's more to say. And what I'd really, really love to do, which we can't, is all of those of you who couldn't think of or use such creative ideas and have a problem. If you don't have a problem, I envy you. But if you have a problem, if you have a challenge in delivering content, in something that's important, or something that you are not doing a job as well as you could, and you can't think of some subtle, experiential photos, shocking them, giving them, then I'd love to hear you, and we'll talk together or talk to one another. And I always have radical ideas. You don't have to adopt them, but thinking on those issues, the challenges, and we all have them in our domains. Things are a bit more difficult to do, challenging to do. I'm not saying do them always when appropriate and as needed, but something to think about if you really want to impact behavior. Because having people go over page after page and do a test in the end, they're not going to remember it in most cases, and unlikely that it's going to change behavior, even if they want to, even if it's a matter of life and death, like septic shock. There's a lot of good things about having an experiential emotional learning, and I don't have too much time to get inside the mind, what happens. And as I like to say, the human mind is not a camera, the way it processes information, and I cannot go into the mechanisms why this is very important in detail. I will just mention that it gets cognitive attention. So when the learning is active on an emotional level, the attention that the brain gives, the mental representations that are acquired are very strong. They're very strong. And part of it has to do with human memory structures. There are many memory systems in the brain, and a classic distinction is between semantic and episodic memory. And a lot of the training we do goes to semantic, but by having the episodic memory, which is more the experiential, emotional experience, will help the memory, and not only help the memory, but move to different brain systems that actually involved in deciding how to behave. And this is something that most people are starting to know, because a person who won Nobel Prize in psychology, they don't have one, they gave it in economics, a psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, wrote a very popular book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And this is based on the fact that the brain has two different decision systems. One is more emotional, and one is more rational. One is more intuitive, gut feeling. One is more analytic. And a lot of the training that you do doesn't have an impact, because when they're at the job performing, it's the intuitive, emotional system, the thinking fast, that is actually taking the decision. So you can train medical doctors or police officers or in the army or whatever your area, you can train them as much as you want on the system and test them, and they perform great on septic shock, whatever it is. But when they're actually making a decision, that part of the brain is not in control. It's a different part, the emotional part, that is deciding. And if you don't train the system that's actually going to determine behavior, then you're putting a lot of gas in neutral. It's not going to go anywhere yet. They can pass the test. They know the material, but when they're out in the field, on an oil rig, talking to a customer, doesn't have to be, medical or police. Talking to a customer in the store, there's different customers. There's a queue. Some people like me are impatient and don't like to stand in the queue, and the people working in the store are getting nervous. There's a lot of people. Those moments, their decision, their behavior, customer service, remembering the product, the tariffs, the mobile phones, whatever your domain is governed by a certain system in the brain which is more emotional and is not rational. So I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. You train a lot the wrong system. You're buying a great car, but you're later going to drive another car. It doesn't matter that it's full of fuel. You're driving the other car, has no fuel, you're going to get stuck. So it has to do with memory and the different decision system. The time is basically up. We need to think about the mechanisms of the brain, of the decision system, of the memory system, and understand that it's important to learn by doing, but you need to give them a memorable experience by engaging, by challenging, surprises. And what I focused on today mainly is the emotional experience. You don't have to traumatize them and shock them. Sometimes you do. Sometimes it's justified. But often you can do with much less stories, photos. And the last thing that I want to reiterate is the power of error. You can show people 100 times how to do it correctly, and they will not remember. One time they make a mistake, that is going to be. In my university years, and I spent many, many, many years in university, the only exam question that I remember is the one I got wrong. That, I remember the question, I remember the right. All the rest, I have no idea what I studied. It all disappeared. But my mistake, I remember it well. And I remember all my good dates that I had. No, forgot. But one bad date that I had 50 years ago, I remember really well. It gave me trauma, I remember it. And it impacted my behavior. The one accident impacted my behavior. And so on and so forth. The power of error. And if you can introduce the error, the experiential, emotional, you're going to get a memorable experience, and then you're going to impact behavior. And at the end of the day, you want to impact behavior, because that's what is your training, or most of your training is not knowledge for the sake of knowledge. It's training them so they will not only acquire, they'll remember it and go and do things differently, and you need to think about it, develop the right training, as well as measure the actual impact of your training. So thank you very much. Our time is up. I know many people need to go at the end of the day, so I'm more than happy, and you're all British, or most of you, so you will not get up and go even though you want to. So please, I'm happy to stay and answer questions as long as people want, but people who need to go or want to go, our time is up, so they're welcome to go. So you can talk to me personally or ask questions now. I'm happy to talk to you. And I also left my email on the bottom left. If you lose it, you can always Google my name. Very strange. It's only one hit, so you'll find it. Any questions that anybody would like to ask in front of everyone? I'm more than happy to take questions now.
Itiel, I draw you to a close, but say Itiel is up here for any questions or any discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, please, your appreciation for a fantastic presentation from Dr. Itiel Dror. Thank you. Thank you very much. There's suitable refreshments outside.